To be perfectly clear, this video won't be about these lame sacks of bones. This video will be about the real Nehekharans, and that wasn't a mispronunciation. These Nehekharans were real in the past tense, since they're all sort of dead now, hence the sacks of bones. Geographically, Nehekhara was nestled in the far south of the Old World, being a crossing point for many volatile locations, like Araby, the Badlands, the Southlands. Well, not so volatile in their time, as their time was 3,000 years before Sigmar was born. Back then, in -3000 IC, 99% of men were savage barbars who spent their time hitting each other with clubs and pissing on the side of elven castles. The Nehekharans were different though. Back then, their land wasn't a barren shithole, it was green and had plants and some other stuff that was green, like trees. Now, in that time, orcs and goblins were still a problem, and the growing agrarian population of Nehekharans found these guys to be kind of pests, with all their slaughtering and wanton warfare and all that, so they built cities, roads, and armies, and all the other fun stuff that comes with organizing bush-shitting tribesmen into a coherent civilization. The Nehekharans, having centralized their new civilization on the river Vitae for a few centuries, spread out like a wave, conquering great swaths of territory and subjugating all those barbarian tribesmen, for their own good, of course. Culturally assimilating the ones more open to the idea of praying to a cat and beheading the rest. Now having plenty of people to spend in a war, the growing Nehekharan civilization spent a second to slaughter all of their problems, driving the orcs from all of their lands as well as killing enough dumb lizards to put hold in the Southlands. Their conquests went on and on and on under many great emperors, including Setra the Perishable. However, the greatest of them was Alcadizaar the Conqueror, who stretched the empire from Araby to the Dragon Isles and from the Southlands to Talea. Alas, Alcadizaar had a life aside from being the best at everything, and I'll tell his great story. Within the womb, his mother was afraid that her child would die of the plague or something, so driven by fear, she traveled all the way to Lamia and begged for somebody who wasn't her to take her newborn child. Honestly, it sounds like she just hated him, but somebody did take Alcadizaar, and it was Nehekhara. She spent 50 years raising him and promising to be his queen and them ruling Nehekhara together forever and all those romantic promises you usually hear from a lying vampire woman. After so much indoctrination and training, Alcadizaar was finally convinced to drink from her elixir of life. However, Alcadizaar, being a true Egyptian gigachad, realized he was a vampire now and was disgusted. But instead of embracing his newfound condition, he abandoned his lying-ass vampire wife and went back home to be the best emperor ever, on his own, without any vampires around him, preferably. Although there was a bit of a problem. The crazy vampire lady he had just abandoned was now running through the streets with a small army trying to find him, so he wouldn't escape. She was just far too jealous of the idea of him leaving to let him go. So he naturally fled into the arms of crime, killing his first man in a back alley slum brawl. After living in the recesses of Lamia, fighting for his life in crime and killing more people, he managed to escape the city, crawling out into the sand and trying to find anybody willing to take him east in a caravan. But unfortunately for him, the caravans wouldn't take him due to suspecting him of being a raider, and he was forced to wander the sands for months, trying to find his way home. Eventually, he came upon a shitty derelict city where he hid for another month, then continuing his arduous travel trying to make it back home. And eventually he actually did, arriving at the capital of the Empire of Nehekhara and whipping up a meeting with his younger brother, who was emperor at the time since his vanishing at birth. Upon telling his brother the story, his brother believed him, but without any evidence aside from his word, he couldn't really convince his vassals to go along with the war. After his brother promised to send agents to the city to uncover evidence, Alcadizaar used his famous Chad stoicism, realizing the only way he was going to get the proof in the proverbial pudding was to go back to Lamia and take it. So he did. Within a month of arriving into the wealthy arms of his family, he was back on the road again with a caravan, broken with not a hoe to his name. He thought getting back into Lamia would be easier this time since at this point it had been a year and a half since he was gone. Nehekhara would have probably been convinced he was dead by now, but he underestimated the vengeful spirit of a woman. Even after all this time, she was still looking and more aggressive than before. When he arrived in Lamia with his caravan, the streets were barren due to Nehekhara's goons stealing people at night and banishing them to try and gather info. Due to matching the description of the man the guards were looking for, they immediately tried to detain him. And when no bribes were able to get them to back off, he killed them all at the docks, and then he killed them all again, but at the gates that time, so he could get the fuck out of Dodge. Vanishing into the sand, Alcadizaar would run into the arms of a tribe of bandits, blending into their ranks for 20 whole years. Eventually, in that time span, due to him being a legend, he gained the loyalty of all the bandits and nomad tribes of the desert, using them to ambush Lamian caravans, eventually snagging one of the vampires themselves and using this captive as all the evidence they needed. With the devilish vampires exposed, Alcadizaar returned to Nehekhara, bringing forth the proof and forcing the hands of his brother and the entire empire. Everybody threw their lot in with Alcadizaar, and they all marched to the city of Lamia. Once there, they all merrily bashed down the city's walls, slaughtered and enslaved the soldiers and populace. Then, in one final duel, Alcadizaar defeated Nehekhara and her vampires. But they never really managed to catch the big one herself, only ever really killing a bunch of her minor vampires. Eventually, after combing through the city for a few more months, they decided that it was probably over with, and Alcadizaar declared that they were gone, giving the city one final burning before they moved on and left it in a pile of rubble. Since he was the rightful king, Alcadizaar was crowned shortly after and led the realm to the height of its power, being the most wealthy and mighty it ever was. Then Nagash came, descending on Alcadizaar's realm with armies of vampires and hordes of undead. Nagash initially had the upper hand, winning many back and forth battles. However, he didn't account for the fact that the weak should fear the strong, getting his back blown out by Alcadizaar as he went on a rampage with his army, slaughtering his way through the now double corpse army with his massive khopesh, beating the shit out of every vampire he saw and beheading then degloving Nagash's main vampire commander named Vashanesh. After getting Alcadizaar's massive schlong slapped across his face, Nagash was naturally mad as fuck, and decided that if he couldn't rule Nehekhara, nobody could, using the last of his magic to poison the river Vitae, making it the river Mortis as of now. Instead of running with nice fresh water, it now ran literally with nothing but poison and blood, pretty foul stuff. At this point is when the land of Nehekhara went from green to a sad yellowish gray color, and the plagues caused by such a catastrophe made it so the corpses in the streets outnumbered the living hiding in their houses. Alcadizaar, looking out from his balcony and seeing this, retreated to his massive imperial throne, weeping the manliest tears known to man, as this wasn't an enemy he could fight by beheading it. Now Nagash came again, had as limp as ever, needing to be carried by 50 score vampires due to not being able to support his own weight. Alcadizaar's army at this point was like 5 guys who all had the bubonic plague, and although they killed 1 billion undead between the 6 of them, the last vampire got a lucky hit in, and Nagash managed to imprison him in the dungeons of his former city. Alcadizaar, ruminating on how his last moments would be spent pondering the fact that all he ever knew was destroyed, was interrupted in his stoic thinking by the entrance of a single robed Skaven. After snapping the little rat's neck, he realized it was carrying a sword, and, now armed, Alcadizaar sprung into action, slaughtering 7,000 vampires as he made his way to the ritual site of Nagash. There, seeing the frail loser chanting some nerd shit at the sky, he beheaded Nagash and then chopped all of his limbs off, killing the skeleton instantly. However, with Nagash's ritual stopped and all of his enemies dead, Alcadizaar looked at his land, now destroyed with probably only 2 dudes left alive in the entirety of Nehekhara, and then he realized that even though he could probably fix all of this in about 5 days if he tried, it would be far more badass if he died while mourning for his lost empire. And so he did, dying of his non-existent injuries on the shores of the former river Vitae, now Mortis. His body vanished after that, but knowing him, it's far more likely he's sitting in a cave somewhere kicking around Nagash's head like a football to pass time instead of actually being, dead. In conclusion, official Nehekharan tier list. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, like the video, comment the video, and subscribe on the video if you want to see videos similar to this one. See ya.
Tell you something that's sitting up on my mind. I can't give me a dime, I can't give me a dime. Oh man, I'm so mad that I can't get the bag. It's so sad. Everybody wanna take all of mine. Everybody wanna take all of mine. Hey, shorty tryna holler, she just want $1, and I don't even think that's enough. Should've robbed her for her love. Sick and I'm feeling kinda stuck. I know she'll want me when I'm coming up. Hey.